This video and the next one will be about Hobbes. This one, though, I'm not going to talk primarily about his theory. When you're looking at any philosopher, any important theoretician of any kind, somebody whose ideas have had a great impact, something that you want to do is to notice the details of that person's life. Sometimes, very often in fact, the details of that person's life are going to be illuminating for understanding that person's thought. Where do these ideas come from? What was this theoretician responding to? Why was this philosopher worried about these questions and not some other set of questions? Those kinds of things are going to matter for many, many, many philosophers. And many, many, many other thinkers as well. But in philosophy, it's extremely important, especially in political philosophy, legal philosophy, ethics, those kinds of things, the areas we call practical philosophy. One of the things that we can look at is why is this person thinking about these particular questions? Why not other questions? So I want to spend a few minutes talking about Thomas Hobbes' historical period, some of the things that were going on there during that time, and some of the ways in which that will have affected the things he writes in his political philosophy. Now, Hobbes is interested in a lot of different areas, okay? He's not just a political philosopher. He's interested, for example, he's interested in political philosophy. He's interested in philosophy of law. He wrote, in fact, a justification of law and an explanation of law, the elements of law. Wrote that in 1640. It was significant. So he was interested in that. He did philosophy of mind, which is the theory of the human mind, how it works, what it is, whether it's independent of the physical realm or part of the physical realm. It's in philosophy of mind, we sometimes talk about the soul and other things like that. So he wrote about that, he thought about it, he had some very important contributions to it, in fact, because they influenced his political philosophy. What did he think about the mind? Hobbes thought that the idea that the mind could be separate from the body, such as René Descartes believed, he thought that was simply ridiculous. He thought that the idea that there could be a non-physical part of human beings was obviously wrong. So he rejected the idea of a non-physical mind. He was a materialist. And it's important to remember his materialism because it plays a role in his theory. Hobbes also rejected the Platonic notion of the forms. He thought that, for example, just to give you an example, if I use the word rock to denote any particular rock, all I'm doing, Hobbes says, is using a word to describe or to denote, to name a category of things. I'm not talking about some ideal, abstract thing or ideal that might actually exist somehow or be somehow real. I'm not doing that. All I'm doing is using language. He would have said the same thing about abstract qualities. He would have said, look, if I name an abstract quality such as white or such as colors, right? If I say white, red, if I name the primary colors, or if I talk about things like hot and cold and that sort of thing, all I'm doing is using words to denote certain things. I'm not talking about abstract qualities of things that somehow exist. I'm not talking about Platonic forms. So that's a significant thing as well. He's a materialist. He believes that this world is all there is. And yet, he does seem to believe in God. There's a bit of a debate about that, but as far as we can tell, Hobbes actually does believe that God exists. So, okay. So he's a materialist. He's interested in these kinds of metaphysical questions, and he does engage in some metaphysics. He's interested in religion. He's interested in theology. He's interested in philosophy of religion. He's interested a little bit in ethics, more in politics. He has an interest in logic. He's very interested in talking about philosophical methodologies and that sort of thing. He's quite interested in mathematics. He tried to contribute to mathematics, but he wasn't particularly successful, apparently. He's interested in language. He's interested in history. In fact, he did some translations that were very important of historical works. So he's a sort of a jack of all trades in some ways. He's an all-purpose intellectual, as many people in that day were. Many intellectuals would be very, very broad. They wouldn't specialize the way people do now. He was also interested in optics. He was very, very interested, and this is important for his theory, he was interested in physics. Very interested in the laws of motion, very interested in the ways in which bodies interacted with each other and that kind of thing. So he's got an interest in the physical world and in the sciences. So Hobbes is a very wide-ranging intellectual. And it's interesting because he's also living in a period of great literary and scientific advancement. Shakespeare dies when he's 28 years old in 1616. In terms of politics, the first English colony was established, not the first English colony, the first permanent English colony was established in 1606 when he was 18 years old. So he's going to have some thoughts about colonization, about what it means to explore, about the New World, and this New World that the Europeans thought was so wild, they thought it was so uncivilized. He's going to be influenced by that. He's not going to talk about it the way John Locke does, but he's still going to be very influenced by it. John Locke is going to be much more influenced by it. We're going to have to really think about it when we get to Locke. In 1609, Kepler came up with, or he didn't come up with them, he published his laws of motion in 1609. He started publishing them then anyway. He finished publishing them in 1618. Why does that matter? Well, the Kepler's laws of motion talked about the ways in which the planets revolve around the sun. This is significant because in the same period, in 1610, Galileo Galilei came up with some observations using his telescope that demonstrated that the Earth revolved around the sun. And the sun didn't revolve around the Earth. And he thus confirmed the Copernican model of a heliocentric solar system. And this was important. This was very important. Science was advancing. And Hobbes believed in the advancement of science. The King James Bible was published in 1611. So there were advancements being made in that kind of realm as well. The popularization of religion. The Puritans became a very important religious movement after that. Or around that time, and that's going to play a very important role later in Hobbes' life. Now, something that's going to prove to be really, really, really important for us is that in the 1640s, well, oddly enough, Hobbes, who loved his country, England, he was involved in public life there. He was a well-known intellectual in the time. And yet, what happens? Well, he goes to Paris in 1640, and he doesn't leave for 11 years. Why does Hobbes spend an entire decade in exile in France when he could have been in London where he would have preferred to be? Well, I'll tell you why. The English Civil War was occurring in that decade. The English Civil War was a conflict between supporters of the monarchy and reformers who wanted to abolish the monarchy and be run by a parliamentary government. Now, this caused actual bloody fighting in two stages in England in the 1640s. And Hobbes was a royalist. And the Republicans were actually the ones who ended up winning. And Oliver Cromwell established a Puritan government, and that government actually killed the king. And we're going to have to talk about exactly the significance of this regicide, because for not just Hobbes, but for political theorists in general, this was a very, very, very significant moment in the history of Europe, as significant in some ways as the French Revolution, although the French Revolution had more permanent effect. And it did some other things that were also of great importance. But the English Revolution, while it didn't stick, it only lasted until Cromwell's death in 1658. 2 years later, the monarchy was reestablished, and a year after that, Charles II was put in as the King of England again, but under with reduced powers and with more power to the Parliament. But that said, even so, it's very important to notice that they killed Charles I. And this is going to have had a deep impact on Hobbes. Now, Hobbes' book, Leviathan, actually is a justification of the state written by a royalist, published in 1651, the year he went back to England, while the Republican government was still in power. We're going to have to ask the question, why did they allow this book to be published? Why didn't they ban it? This wasn't unusual to ban books in that period, so why was that book not banned? What was it about Hobbesian theory that Cromwell thought he could get along with? That's something we need to think about. But I'm going to end this video with that, and we're going to think about Hobbes' theory in the next video in a little more detail. We'll talk about the state of nature, and we'll talk as well about some other things. And then in subsequent videos, we'll talk about Locke's theory, and we'll also talk about Rousseau's theory, and we'll go on. And I probably won't go into this kind of detail about Locke's life and Rousseau's life, although I'm going to talk about them a little bit, and then we'll go on and talk about their justification of the state after we've talked about their social, their states of nature. So with that, I'm going to end now, and we'll see you in the next video.